All right, good job making it here, having the first quiz. We had a few questions. List one of the four aspects of modernism listed by Maurice Speed. We're going to talk about these some during lecture today. The four aspects are formalism and a respective form, or a consideration of form, detachment / irony. We'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Myth and a reappropriation or reevaluation of myth, using myth in a non-conventional way, including religious myth, in this case, like Christian, but mostly classical. And then also, of course, solipsism, concerned with its own conception. Know that modernism, the writers, solipsism means to live in a, or to believe that one lives in a world in which only one self is real, sort of Matrix-esque, as it were. It is like a profound form of narcissism, which is where narcissism is slightly different. It's when one believes that one is the most valuable thing in existence, whereas solipsism seems to be that one believes one is the only thing in existence. And there are hard and soft versions of solipsism. In any case, what is the name of Don Quixote's horse? Rocinante. That is, of course, not its original name, just as Don Quixote is not Alonso Quixote's original name, just as Dulcinea, his love, is not her original name. I'll give somebody an extra credit point. They know the name of Dulcinea because she was renamed. Aldonza Lorenza. All right, and she's apparently a peasant girl who's very good at threshing wool, something that would define her as her class as somebody who worked with her hands rather than a noble lady who, noble ladies worked with their hands too, but not outside. So they would often not be tanned, not have calloused hands, would have finery on that one can have when one is not walking through the muck, which is why it's sort of tough to dress in a suit while walking through LSU. And often they would do things like needlework. So they did use their hands, but in sort of slightly different manners with different connotations. All right, third question in here. What is the name of the Arab historian who wrote, quote unquote, Don Quixote? Cide Hamete Benengeli. So if you came pretty close to that, you got it. And we may be able to talk about that a little bit today, probably not. The three things we still have to do today are to go through lecture a bit. I may stop at the episode of Windmills just before or just at chapter 8. Then I need to give you a very, very, very brief symposium on how to write an outline. This is going to be very brief. I mean for this to just be touched on. For more advanced, more rigorous feedback on how to do this and how to do this correctly and what I mean when I say the things that I say and write on the board, please come see me or email me. It is not likely that in a 2000 level literature class, I'm going to have the time to really walk you through how to write like in a 1000 level composition class. That said, I'm perfectly happy to give you as much attention as you are willing to take in order to improve your writing. I am a professional writer. You should consider, learning how to write for me like somebody who is a major symphony in the city and learning a musician or learning a musical instrument from them. You should also know with my languages, it's like I play many, many, many instruments and have gone through the process of playing many, many instruments. And so when I teach you how to do something, it's not because I read one book that told me how. It's more likely that I wrote many books that tell many people how. And so just understand that distinction, and when you're thinking about what it is that you have access to, know that you are paying good money for something that is worth it. In any case, Don Quixote's structure. We talked about this last time. Remember that it was first published in 1605, then the second part in 1650, and that part of the modernist formal element of it is that it was not meant to be two parts. It's interesting. The initial conception of Don Quixote made it so that when you finish the first part and its four subparts, you have finished the entirety of what was first conceived by the author. And then, who can recall why Cervantes decided to write the second part 10 years later? Yes?
Because someone else did, and then he got it.
Somebody else took his character, wrote a second part about his character that he had totally created. There's not a fictional folk character who was just a stock character that many people have used, like the Faust character, for example, that we'll see in and when we read Goethe in our second book. That's a character that there are many tales about, and many authors have used him, and then Goethe just wrote the best tale about him. Also, that the Spanish author I was thinking of last time that wrote 1,000, the playwright who wrote 1,000 plays, it was Lope de Vega. Sorry that I forgot him. Yes, and do you remember the name, the pseudonym of this spurious, or this writer of this spurious second part of Don Quixote? Avellaneda. And I know this is going to be kind of hard to say. Avellaneda. Yeah, double L in Spanish makes a ya sound like, so llegar, or me llamo, means I'm called. Me llamo, je m'appelle in French. All right, first part is split into 4 parts. Like I said, the second part itself is very interesting in that it was not part of the initial conception of the novel, and yet now it is included in one volume with the novel. So even when you ask the question of, is this a unity or is this a bifurcated double that's just put into one form, not maybe 2 forms here. It's the fate of all books for professors. It's a confusing question. It is a confused question. Is this 2 works of literature that are slapped together, or is this 1 work of literature that is allowed to develop in a strange way, even though the second part was not initially conceived as being part of the first? And in fact, the second part not only integrates information from the first part, but also from the spurious second part that was not written by the author. You can understand, you can see here the 4th aspect of modernism at play, concern with the act of creating writing. You see this also with the confusion of who wrote this work itself. There is a Cid Hamete Ben-Yeli who wrote a very true or completely true history in Arabic. And it's then translated from Arabic to Spanish, Castilian Spanish, for the narrator, who then relates it to us. And so this is part of the modernist element of this text, confusing us. Is this 1 or is this 2? Is it singular? Is it plural? Who is the author? And what does authorship mean in this work? And also keep in mind, part of the form and construction is that our author is constantly contradicting himself. He says he will not have a prologue. He then has a prologue. He has a longer prologue than many of the stories that he is talking about. Amadis de Gaul is one of the great chivalric tales. And chivalric tales about knights and ladies with enchanters, sometimes dragons. And then also he has a sonnet from Amadis de Gaul. He also has a sonnet from Orlando Furioso. Orlando is the Italian name for Roland, who had a very famous horn and was a French knight of Charlemagne's, believe nephew of Charlemagne's, who, if he had not been so proud, he could have blown his horn while he was flanked on 2 sides by the Moors he was fighting against, and Charlemagne would have come to his aid and he would have lived, and yet his pride got to him, and so he died. One reason that Orlando is included alongside Don Quixote is that Orlando is also very famous for having lost his mind. What is sort of a colloquial way of calling somebody crazy? In fact, there's an old animated production company named for this. It has to do with celestial phenomena. You must think I'm a lunatic or something asking questions like these. Looney Tunes, right? And in fact, some people still say you're Looney Tunes, which is sort of clever, but what they mean to say is that you are a what? A more official word, yes. A lunatic. Lunatic. Okay, Luna. I seem to know where this word comes from. I may not be that much of a Latinist, but Luna. Like, what's the opposite? So there's like Luna, and then what's the other one? The daytime version. If Sola, like Sola, yes, Luna and Sola. Lunar and solar. Oh, moon and sun. To be a lunatic, the idea is that your mind has gone out of this world to the moon. In fact, one of the things that Orlando Furioso has to do in all of his theory, in his 1,500-page epic, which I've had the pleasure of reading, is he has to go to the moon to recapture his wits. And so to call someone a lunatic is to suggest their mind is, well, out of this world. In any case, it happens to be the case that though Cervantes claims that he will not write sonnets and include Latin quotes like so many typical chivalric tales do, he does the same thing. He subverts what he claims he is going to do. He contradicts himself. And so a question you will have and address when you write about modernism is, does he do this intentionally in order to test you as a reader? Or is he careless as a writer? Does he make mistakes? Either one of the answers that you take would have to be explained because it would be a new way of writing, including obvious contradictions in order to test the patience and reading ability and intelligence of a reader, or is now, since reading has become a leisure activity since the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, I've got that here, in 1453, are there now a new class of individuals, the minor nobility, like Don Quixote originally was, who have a few servants, and he has an old servant, he has a man who works around the house, and he has a niece, and he likes to hunt. That's a leisure activity, right? And he likes to read, and he reads all night. With this new class of individuals who has the time and money to just idly sit about and project their fantasies onto a dead piece of wood. This must be what like dogs and cats see when they see you reading, when you do read. These people now can sit around and sort of fantasize all day with these objects that are no longer holy. So prior to the invention of the printing press and the huge migration and explosion of literature and the capacity for people to read literature, very similar to the coming of the internet and the coming of search engines like Google, and then databases like Wikipedia, which used to be considered totally totally unhelpful or full of lies. Now I think it's seen very differently. Is that now works the only work of literature, or how should I put this? The vast majority of reading people did prior to the invention of the printing press or listening was to holy works, particularly the Bible, if one happened to be Jewish or Christian. Now, with all of these fantasy works being made that are themselves fictional, perhaps fictional in a similar way to stories in the New and Old Testament, perhaps ontologically different. I mean, well, we're thinking about the difference between this holy and sacred text and the potential fictions within those, and a non-sacred or secular text and the fictions within them. Well, this man, in reading these works of fiction, rather than finding himself becoming something like a saint, if, say, he read the lives of the saints, hagiographies, and his religious works, he goes crazy, thinking that he can now become a knight. And so there's an interesting notion there that reading and art have value. And in fact, they have a very strong effect on those who absorb them. And in fact, they had such a strong effect on this man that they drove him out of his mind. And you'll find he's actually a fairly intelligent man when he talks about things that don't concern chivalric romances. And whenever I say chivalric romances, think of tales of knights and ladies. Probably the most prototypical one for American audiences these days are like Lancelot and Guinevere and King Arthur and the various Arthuriana tales. Probably you've never heard of Orlando Furioso or of Amadis de Gaul, though you will have heard about them. Good future, perfect there. All right. Don Quixote's learning, driving him crazy. This is a nice little image here. You can see here that he is surrounded by figments of his imagination represented in physical form. Sort of if you ever thought about, if you're a visual artist, it might be an interesting experiment to think, how do you represent insanity in a figure, in a person? These days, using realism, we might make their face look a certain way, right? Like their eyes are askance or something like that. But here, the realism is put away. We just have, here's Don Quixote here, seems to be sort of sleeping, or at least his mind is asleep. His rational faculty, at the very least. You know that your rational faculty goes to sleep at night, and then all of a sudden your imagination takes over. Sort of being an adult or being mature is to go the opposite direction. Though it's a sad direction to take in some way. Dragon here, oh, a spear from a knight attacking it, sort of St. George-esque, the modern rendition of that, of course, is Harry Potter and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when a great English saint defeats a dragon, a basilisk at the end. Well, let's continue to talk about people whose names are changed. Dulcinea de Toboso of Toboso is the love interest of Don Quixote. In Alonso Quixote's real life, there will be, again, a major ambiguity respecting this. And so keep this lecture in mind. What do I mean? Very beginning of this text, in the prologue, one hears, or sorry, in chapter 1, right after the prologue, one reads, depending on whether you're listening to Audible or not, that there was a peasant girl from Toboso that Don Quixote had been in love with, though she did not know. He'd never spoken to her. This is sort of an idea of courtly love, where one can fall in love with the projection of what a lady is without ever actually meeting her or physically consummating that love, which is often sort of the goal of a relationship. And, there would be no families if that were not the goal of many relationships. In the second part, Sancho will make the claim that he never met Dulcinea. And then Don Quixote will also say that he's never met Dulcinea. And Sancho will claim to sort of have made her up. And so this, again, will be a contradiction that we see. Is Dulcinea based on a real person that Don Quixote has illegitimately renamed and turned from a peasant into a princess, in the same way that he has illegitimately taken on the Don title to himself, in the same way that, not quite the same way, but in a similar way to how he renames his horse Rocinante, who is itself a nag. A nag is a work horse. You may know there are different sorts of horses. Horses that are sort of the noble, beautiful horses are called Clydesdales. These are the biggest horses. The Budweiser Clydesdales, if you watch the Super Bowl, you'll get to see thoroughbreds or racing horses, but they're not the grandest and largest of them. So to give Rocinante a new name is itself attempting to change the nature of the horse from a simple workhorse to a great horse. Similarly, though not the same as turning a peasant woman into a noble queen, similarly to what Sancho will want to do with himself, from being a peasant man working the land to becoming a duke and running an insula. Very curious. The reason that Don Quixote feels the need to have a lady love is that after he has read his books of chivalry, he has decided that he will become a knight. He will rename himself. He will rename his horse. Oh, I was going to say this. Rocinante means before nag. It means ante, like antebellum, before war, means before. Rosin is the word for nag in Latin. So his name indicates what he used to be, perhaps what he still is. And so if you really want to write an essay on names, Rocinante and Dulcinea. Dulcinea is an abstract verb from dulce, which means, any of you know what dulce is? Or we have the word dulcid in our language. Sweet. She is sweetness embodied. And so you can see the projection, right? Especially on to a peasant woman who would be, perhaps you don't know this, but peasant food at this time, and this is something actually very valuable. Do any of you know what certain garnishes that find their ways into almost every food that are originally considered peasant food? Any of you cooks, chefs? You see these in almost everything. Onions, for example, onions and garlic. Think back to the 17th century. How many electric refrigerators in the 17th century? I want you to really think about this, because I hate onions. You may consider this heresy. Why might your meat need lots of onion and garlic in it? What does onion and garlic do to food? Not exactly preserve, not preserve, but you're thinking in the right way. So it doesn't preserve. Yes, I saw a funny face. Are you getting it? Keeps the bugs away as we wish it would preserve or keep the bugs away. The food continues to go worse and worse. And yet, why might you need something with a really strong taste like onion or garlic? Because it brings flavor, because what's happening to your meat? Right? And what's the quality of your meat? I mean, maybe some of you are hunters and you know how to skin a creature, but Do you know how you're, if you are meat eaters, if you're not a meat eater, you can tune this out a little bit. But do you know where your meat comes from? Do you know how it's prepared? Do you know how it gets into the packages that you have? And so at this time, it's very important because how you prepare and preserve meat can make a big difference. This still happens, by the way. We still have huge outbreaks of people getting poisoned by bad meat. And in different countries, this is actually a daily occurrence. We don't have the FDA and the sort of tools we have. So if you ever travel through Asia, South America, or Africa, for example, you should be really careful when you eat street food if you're not acclimated to the germs in this, because I know this from experience. I know this from bad experience. And so these sorts of things were added to meat in order to preserve the taste, even though the quality was going down and down. And so so these are things that are added to meat to disguise the flavor of it, to disguise the quality of it. And so I'm forgetting exactly what I was saying. That was a very interesting sort of thing. In any case, the Don Quixote takes a lady love, renames her Dulcinea, so she apparently will not know that she is named Dulcinea because she did not give this name to herself, nor does she know Don Quixote personally. He does this because the characters from the novels, or excuse me, from the works of chivalric romance, the protagonist knights that he valorizes themselves have lady loves, and he will make the claim that one cannot, in fact, be a knight errant. That means a wandering knight. The word error comes from errant as well. So not all who wander are lost, is great J.R.R. Tolkien line that is riffing on the dual etymology of those works. So error is to go off track, but to be errant is to journey. So that doesn't necessarily mean, so it's not like he's saying he is a knight in error when he calls himself a knight errant, but he defines a knight errant as having to be in love, having to have a lady love. In fact, interestingly about this, though, he will have debates about this with various literary characters that he meets. In fact, get into physical brawls multiple times because of their different interpretations of literature from him. Pretty funny. If you ever said that you did that, of course, I can't officially congratulate you for that, but in my heart of hearts, I would really say, yeah, you really cared. And so to be a knight errant must be in love. And so Orlando, from Orlando Furioso, who is he in love with? He is in love with the great Angelica, angel, who actually, he's Christian. She chooses a Muslim over him at first, and that is what drives him crazy. It drives him out of his wits, drives his wits to the moon. This is not a woman that he mentions, but is part of the tradition. I myself am a student of Dante, but Dante in his Commedia, that's the Italian name for the Divine Comedy, has a lady love named Beatrice. It means 3 times blessed. Beatus means blessed or happy. Blessed is sort of a sacred word for the notion of happiness. If you ever wondered about the Beatitudes, the blessed things. In any case, Amadis de Gaul is in love with Oriana, and if you recall the initial sonnets that our author told us we were not going to have, and that we did have, both Oriana and Angelica, Oriana speaks or writes a sonnet to Dulcinea, and Orlando and Amadis write sonnets to Don Quixote. And of course, as I told you, and then laughed to myself, Bucephalus, the horse of Alexander the Great, which is a nice piece of trivia to know, writes a sonnet to Rocinante. Again, this is messing with form and construction, because what do we know about horses? Well, even if we know very little about horses, there's one thing we can say about horses and their ability to compose literature. Unless you're a big fan of Mr. Ed, we have yet to have a horse that was capable of writing in Spanish and of constructing a sonnet. We don't have that many humans. In any case, so when Don Quixote talks about Dulcinea and mentions Orlando Furioso, know that he is trying to be like one of these fictional knights who exist in fictional spaces where there are, in fact, enchanters, where there are, in fact, ladies and castles and a narrative that constantly sends new events their way. Something realist and therefore modernist about Don Quixote, that once he sort of, and perhaps you will experience this when you leave college, is that when he goes out into the world, fantastic things do not happen to him. Normal things happen to him. In fact, it takes a little while for this book to get going because it seems like nothing interesting will ever happen at first unless you really have a great sense of humor and are really enjoying it, which you should. Cervantes is a very, 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 very funny author. He's kept around not because he's canon, but he's canon because he's funny. He's canon because he's good. And this is, there are many, many aspects of this work that make it advanced and masterful level literature. In any case, we have to continue to move forward. I'm not going to be able to go as far as I wanted to because I need to talk a little bit about how to outline today, but I do want you to note these two images of Dulcinea and to compare them in your own mind and think of this might be how, say, Don Quixote imagines Dulcinea, right? You notice her garb. It does not look like peasant garb. It's not dirty, for example. She's putting up her hair. She's doing her hair. As a long-haired person, I can tell you that when somebody is taking the time to do their hair, it's generally not just to go to work. It's particularly not to go to work outside, or your hair will get dusty and nasty and sweaty. But this might be more like what she would actually look like. You see the difference? This is black and white, but this might be more of a projection of Dulcinea. Dulcinea as Dulcinea. Because this might be far more like Aldonza Lorenza. What are a couple of the differences that you see? They don't have to be small or big. Dulcinea A, Dulcinea B. Dulcinea A, Dulcinea B. You go to optometrist ever? There's one. There's two. What do you see? Let's see if we get two differences. Yes?
Because these are clearly the bottom muscle.
And that actually gets brought up. You can see she got some nice forearms here. We might say she's strong. She clearly is a worker of some sort. I'll tell you, even in my own profession, that I sometimes catch flack from scholars from not being appropriately sized for a scholar. In fact, even out in public, people will often feel inclined to be like, you have a large X or a large Y. Whenever you look different from those around you, you should expect people to bring it up whenever and wherever you go, whether it's a good thing about you or a bad thing. So if you have a giant mole on your forehead, I'm sorry, everybody ever is going to talk to you about it. Sorry, sad. But I experienced this myself. What's the second thing? So she clearly is strong and works outside. That's how they didn't have gyms at this time. Though gyms are an old thing. Ancient Greece is where gyms first came from. Gumnos means naked, because they wrestled naked with each other. Yes?
In the first one, she looks much more sophisticated.
Right. She looks much more like what we would think of a noble lady. And there is a class element to this too. You notice the shade, the pigment of her skin here. And so this is something that a lot of Americans don't necessarily know, but across, say, Western Europe, and there are places in India and South America where conventions like this also reign. Often northern individuals are paler than southern individuals for fairly obvious sort of celestial reasons. That said, something about her having paler skin here as opposed to darker skin is also an indication of what? She doesn't work outside, right? It's a class distinction. And you might say that it's a distinction in beauty, that some people might think that her fairness adds to, in fact, that is a term that we use. It means attractiveness. If you watch Snow White, to be fair, but it also means to be extremely pale. And so you see that that concept is tied to class as well. But at the very least, regardless of what you do with such notions, the idea is that this is more of an imaginary, noble version of Dulcinea, who is in fact a lady, whereas this is more likely a representation of Aldonza Lorenza and what the peasant woman on which Dulcinea is based would actually look like. But this is very much what Don Quixote might see. You understand the distinction between what I'm saying here? It's sort of like when Friedrich Nietzsche says love is precisely the emotion that you feel when you see that which is not. The idea that when you fall in love with somebody, you don't fall in love with them because of what they are, but for what you think they are, which is an odd notion. In any case, I need to pause on this. I'll talk a little bit more about prelude topics themselves on Monday, because I need to give a quick outline or adumbration of how to write a good outline. I even wrote the notes on this just to make sure I get it right, but I don't really like looking. So your very first essay is a 3-page essay. That means you're not going to have a lot of time to write it. I do not subscribe to the theory of the 5-paragraph essay, but you might have 5 paragraphs. What I'm going to talk about are types of paragraphs. You need 3 types of paragraph in this essay. You need intro, you need body, and you need a conclusion. And I'm going to outline 3 of these. The body ones, I'll talk about the relationship of them to each other. There is a fairly sophisticated one. In your introduction, you need to have a topic sentence, give background on your topic, give your thesis statement. And since I'm just touching on all of this, we can talk much more about what any of these aspects are. You need, if you're like, what is background? What is a thesis? Ask me. I'll tell you. Thesis statement. And here's something I add that makes writing better. Also, what is the relevance of your thesis? A lot of young writers don't do this in class writing because they're like, the relevance is I have to write this for class. No. What you're practicing here is writing like a professional. You need to tell me why you're writing about what you're writing. Why is it interesting? I don't care. I'm your reader. You need to prove it to me. I'm the one who's there to be entertained or educated. More important. So I need to really trust that what you're saying to me has some value. Include the relevance. Makes a difference. Can make a big difference in your writing. Okay, let's see. Did I miss anything? Okay, here's another thing that needs to be included at the end of your introductory paragraph. The structure of the paper. This shows that you know what you're talking about and what you're going to say. And often you have to go back after you've written your paper and then lay this out. What you're writing when you write the structure of the paper are, what are you going to talk about in your 3 body paragraphs? So you say, this is my thesis. Don Quixote is not crazy. Ooh, very provocative. Very interesting. You say, because of this, this, and this. X, Y, and Z. And perhaps X, Y, and Z are all moments or events from the text itself. Okay, great, great. Tell me that you're going to talk about X, Y, and Z at the end of the introduction. Don't explain yourself. The explanations will come in the body paragraphs. But it is the mark of good writing to tell me what it is you're going to be writing about so that I know that I want to continue to read. I will continue to read even if you don't include these things. But remember that I'm tallying things and such. And then include a transition. Something like, and now to the body paragraph. Don't spend too much time thinking about how to transition well. This is more like a, that's my version of an asterisk. A lot of people call it asterisk. Asterisk. Aster, star, it's a star. So not as important. All right, body paragraphs. Topic sentence. What is this body paragraph about? Something that good topic sentences will do in body paragraphs is they will relate to the thesis. They will point to the thesis. We'll say, Don Quixote is not crazy. Don Quixote clearly shows that he is not crazy during this moment in the text. Something like that. The second thing that you'll do is that then you begin your argument. So you've stated what you're going to argue, and you begin your argument. Within your argument, good writing will include textual evidence. That's really the only sort of evidence you can have when you're discussing the text. Either evidence from the primary text or from a secondary work. Usually you want a quote. And I say generally one quote or one clear reference to the text which requires citation per paragraph tends to be good. you include a second one, it should be really, really, really closely related to the first one. And you should be able to argue for both quotes with basically the same argument. Otherwise, you're going to overburden your paragraph. A paragraph, like a sentence, like a paper, is meant to teach one thing. In the same way that you teach one thing simply in a sentence, you teach in a slightly more complicated way in a paragraph, teach in a slightly more complicated way in a paper, teach in a slightly more complicated way in a book itself. Some concepts are so advanced that they require much more thinking and arguing in order to understand them than others. There are very simple concepts, there are complicated concepts. Depending on where you get with your thinking, you'll either get to the 25-piece puzzles or the 1,000-piece puzzles. But that depends on you. See, this is huge. I'm going to make another asterisk. This is an asterisk that means something different. This now means important, whereas this one means unimportant. Funny how symbols can mean opposite things, like inflammable. What does that mean? It means that it can catch on fire. It also means that it can't. These things come in flames. Well, in any case, explain your textual evidence. I will say that the organization of the paper as a whole shows the sophistication of the thinker and the writer. And it's important to have the structure correct. In the same way that you need to put your shirt on your, on your torso and your pants on your legs. You can wear them differently, but your outfit's not going to look quite right. Unless you're, Paris Fashion Week or whatever, and that's the sort of thing done. But explaining how your textual evidence actually makes your point and relates to your thesis is, it's like the burger, it's like the meat in the burger. It's the most substantial part of what you're saying. And then D, I've only got a minute here, so I'm not going to keep you too much time. Oh, now I see why that's transition. Okay. Then you might say you repeat this for your third, your fourth, your fifth, your sixth, your seventh, however many body paragraphs you have. But one thing I want to say before I mention the conclusion, I'm just going to call this 3 for now, is that with your body paragraphs, you want there to be a progression in the strength of your arguments. You want your third argument, your last body paragraph. Let's pause this for a second, just so I know I've got everybody, because this is important. You want your third body paragraph or your fourth, whichever is your final one, your strongest. You want your arguments to get stronger and stronger and stronger, so that your reader is left with the strongest impression at the end. This is subtle, but is important. If you are writing and you find that you've written a really okay fourth paragraph, but your second paragraph is really strong, then think about reorganizing. You don't necessarily need to have. Paragraphs can be reorganized. And then, okay, last thing, and I'm going to say this very quickly and this for your conclusion. It's basically a mirror image of your introduction, but instead of telling me what I will see, you tell me what I have seen with one major addition. So you give me a topic, sentence, you tell me what was proved, and then here's the final most important thing. What can I do with what you said? Further avenues of study. So if you studied and make the claim that Don Quixote is not crazy, what can I as a scholar now study based on your work? What is a topic I could think about? You need to lay that out for me. This is part of the relevance of your text. This makes a huge difference to the value of what you're putting forward, and therefore to your grade, because your grade will reflect the value as accurately as it can. All right, that's all I've got for you today, even though I had more to get. Do remember